The Forecaster is an online tool that I've built that lets you do a time series forecast on any data that you choose. I will leave a link below, and you can use it for free for now. So what can it be used for? Imagine you have a time series data set, like a trend line. Typically, you will imagine having a day-by-day plot where you can see something changing over time. And then you want to predict where that line is going to be in a month, for example, or in 2 months, or in a week, or even in a day sometimes, depending on what you're trying to predict. So let's say you have an Etsy store or you have an Amazon store, and you have there the number of products sold, and you're excited, wow, this is growing, this is picking up, where I'm going to be in a month, you know, at this rhythm, where I'm going to be there. So you can come here then into this tool, enter the number of sales you've been having, and you can see what is the predicted or estimated number you're going to get in a month, for example, and in 6 months. It could be the number of YouTube views, right? You can have just a channel which is maybe picking up, and you're curious to know where you're going to be in 6 months, or in a week. It could be your own weight. Imagine you're on a diet and you are trying to reach a certain goal, and you're curious how many days it's going to take. So you can enter here your daily measures of your weight, and then it will tell you where you're going to be in 30 days, in 7 days, for example. So how does it work? It works by entering the data into this box here, this first box, so C number 1. And this is a table that has 2 columns. One column is the day, and the other one is the value. The value is the thing that you want to forecast, is the number you want to forecast. You can input whatever names you want, because then the step 2 is to map, is to define what column is the day and what column is the value. So in my case, I'm using Bitcoin data. I just downloaded online, and I input here the Bitcoin data for a couple of months, from June until the end of November. And then I say that the date of that table I've entered is the day, and the price, which is the Bitcoin price, is the value. Oh, one important thing, this is tab separated columns. So between these 2 columns, there's a tab. So once you've entered the data, you specify what is the mapping between what you entered and the things that the tool needs, which is the day and the value. And then you define how many days looking ahead you want to predict. Once you have that, you will then see this chart on the right, which is the representation of all the data you entered, which is the black dots. It shows also the forecast, so it's the algorithm working and producing like a line that shows how does these numbers behave over time, and also when the black dots end, it means this is the last real data you have, and then after that are the predictions, so all the way to 20 days ahead in time. The light blue shaded area around the dark blue is important. This is the uncertainty interval. So this tells you, the algorithm will tell you, I predict the number is going to be this, but it's going to have a margin of error. It's going to be between this value and this value, the lower and the top. After that, we can see the exact value that is forecasted in 28 days. So for the data of Bitcoin going from July all the way to end of November, and if I say, what's the price 28 days later, we see that it predicts to be 13,741. And it gives you, again, that margin of error between 12,000 and 15,000 in this case. Okay, so that's the main way of working with it and using it. The other thing it shows you also are patterns of what I'm calling here seasonality, but are patterns within in a weekly basis. What days typically are the highest, the lowest. If you have long enough data, for example, a whole year, it will show you also what months of the year are unique, lower and higher. This is very important for seasonality. Depending on the data you use here, for example, if you sell a product sales often have wide variations depending if it's a holiday period or if it's not. So depending what you're trying to predict, that is good to keep in mind here. And what this section of the tool will show you is what are the patterns that we can observe from the data. For example, for the Bitcoin data I do not have a whole year. I didn't download the whole year. I only got a few months. But we can see here weekly patterns. So interestingly enough, and I don't know why, but it seems the Bitcoin values are typically the lowest on Tuesday and the highest on Thursday. If someone knows, feel free to add into the comments. It's an interesting curiosity or interesting thing. The other thing you can do is download the forecasts. So this section, which goes from real date all the way to the number that you are trying to predict ahead of time, you can download into a table. So you can take that with you sometimes to use for your own forecasts or for your own work that you're trying to get done. And you can download those numbers into your machine. Okay, notes, right, or things to be aware of. There's no magic here, right? This is a top of line data science time series algorithm, but in reality, the future is always a mystery. Like, for example, COVID, you could have used a tool like this before COVID, predict something, then COVID hits and the numbers are completely off, right? So use this as a suggestion, never as a guarantee. Leverage your own judgment. Also, the tool does not have any context of the data. So, for example, here I'm predicting or I'm forecasting Bitcoin, and there has been a trend here that the last few months of Bitcoin have been going down. Actually, many of them since August 22. So if I continue the forecast into a year ahead, it's going to give me actually a negative number for Bitcoin, which cannot happen in reality, right? Bitcoin will bottom out, if anything, at zero, and most likely never hits that, right? But the tool does not have any context of the data, so you have to be aware that the tool is just making a prediction, giving some generic data, and it doesn't know what it is. So some data might not go below zero. That's why I'm saying, and you kind of have to be aware of. So don't predict it's going to zero, or don't take the tool results as for granted, just like that. Now, last section I want to mention, which is how to improve the forecast. So there's something to be said about the how long is the data set that you enter into the tool. So on one side, the more data set you enter into the tool, the better the forecast. So, for example, what I mentioned before about the seasonality, right? That sometimes things in a holiday changes massively. So let's say you enter the data for November, and then you ask the tool what is going to be my result in December, right? And it might be really different than reality, because in December things sometimes change a lot. For example, in selling a product. So in this case, would be better to add more than a year of data, because then the tool would observe that last December, the pattern observed was that there was a significant difference there, right? So the tool is actually able to adapt to those if you give it enough data. On the other side, imagine you have this Etsy store or Amazon store and you are trying to predict the future, but recently you changed your product line massively. So it doesn't make sense to try to predict What's the future if you enter data into this tool by using a mix of your old product line and the new product line, right? You're better off just entering the data you have for the new product line and then doing a forecast of that. So that there's that trade-off of how much data you should enter and whether it makes sense to be a long period. For example, also when COVID hit, right? You should not use data here which is pre and post-COVID or during COVID even. So you have to be aware of that. Potentially to predict things, I would only use, for example, data post-COVID and not use the part before that. The other thing is the more naturally, and this is intuitively makes sense, the more in the future you try to predict, the more the forecast is uncertain. And you see that reflected in this blue shaded area. You see that this blue shaded area will open up a lot once you try to predict more and more in the future. And now some last tips on how on making better predictions and better forecasts. And I think this section might be a little bit more to the data science inclined folks or statistical inclined folks. So skip it if you don't if it's not your cup of tea. But see that this variation is, when this variation of the black dots is big, you're gonna have at the end more uncertainty level. So typically you would want to have that variation the smaller the possible. One thing that is used a lot in finance world is to do a 7-day or even a 28-day moving average. Okay, so what that does is you can still do you can still have numbers day by day, but each day will be the average of the last 7 days. So you kind of have a trend that always includes, if you do, for example, 7 days, you always have a trend that includes the weekends. Typically, the weekends are different than the rest of the days, like depending on the data you're trying to do. But then you will include the whole week. So actually, you will see your black dots move a lot more slowly. They won't have so many variations over time. And the same thing can be done for the 28-day moving average. So it really depends on the data set you're trying to predict. There is one tip. The second tip is log transformations. So again, depending on the data you have, it can be useful to do a log transformation of your value. So you apply log to every line of your data and transform it so that, because when the data is exponential, you should apply that log. It will make it linear and distributed in a way that the tools typically work better. Not only this tool, but many tools, they require to do this log transformation. Although, do note, once you do the log transformation, the predicted value you're going to get at the end is also going to be the log. So you have to reverse that to get then to the intervals of the data that you are trying to predict. So do keep that in mind. I hope this is useful. Bye for now.